he was very eloquent, but I think he got it backwards. I should be thanking him. That I am here is because of Tundi, because of Yu's incredible openness, his passion for thinking about this great work and the other great works of Wagner's, and for making something completely improbable and completely wonderful. He and Jenna have done something that actually made me want to reach out and do something because I wanted to be part of this. Because Tundi is not just an opera company, it is a community. You saw Wendy Sylvester yesterday, I assume, as Fricka. She's also Tundi's media master. And she's called it a wild band of misfits who sit up all night and debate mythology, morality, spirituality, linguistics, everything, until we figure out exactly what we think Wotan or Fricka is saying in that sentence, then entirely change our minds at 9 a.m. when we have to put it on its feet, and again at 8:37 p.m. when we get to the line in performance.
I must interrupt with regret and say that we have not called the projector technology into operation.
Oh, okay. All right, I will, I can't really show pictures on the phone so you can see it. There are only two small pictures and they were minor anyway, and so thank you. Anyway, I've come to think that what Wendy was talking about is exactly what Wagner had hoped for in his interpreters. And I think also that Wagner's model of human flourishing and the world as it should be wasn't the city or the church or the academy, but the theater, a community of intensely individual artists and artisans who listen attentively to one another and willingly merge their talents, striving to create something much greater than any of them could do on their own. Listening, receptivity, was central to Wagner's idea of artistic creation. I try to bring this out in my upcoming book, The Philosopher's Ring, Wagner as Thinker and Dramatist, which is something else I owe to Tundi. It's also what I tried to practice as I was writing it. I wanted to listen to Wagner's own words, and then listen to the ring with those words still echoing in my mind. It was meant to be a process of discovery, and to my delight, that's what it turned out to be. I thought, for instance, that any book about the ring was going to be about the master, like The Times, the sage of Bayreuth with something to say about everything, the Napoleon of the arts, so influential that it's all too easy to believe the canard that there were more books written about Wagner than any other human being except Jesus of Nazareth and, yes, Napoleon. Instead, I found myself in the company of a different Richard Wagner, the Wagner of 1850. The political exile, still pretty young, still trying to figure things out, to make sense of his world and of his times, and of what had happened to him and his hopes, and who was still not sure how any of that could go into the operas he was sure he was going to compose. And to my surprise, I discovered that he had done a lot of that exploration through an engagement with what is often called classical German philosophy, the extraordinary intellectual ferment that started with Kant and went on through the idealism of Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel, just to name the stars. Of course, being Wagner, he didn't quite care to let us know where he got his ideas, but the signs are there if you know where to look. But philosophy doesn't get much respect these days. It's supposed to be answering the big questions like, what is reality? Who are we? What can we really know? But most of us go through life without needing to ask those questions, and if we do ask them, philosophy is no help. Philosophers can never agree on the answers anyway. It makes more sense to rely on sciences like psychology and neurology, and we don't need a bunch of woolly theory spinners. I used to shy away from philosophy myself, but I've come to see that it can offer something very, very important. Answers are actually slippery things, and self-evidence is in fact unreliable. And just because we can think about our own thoughts and feelings doesn't mean that we see ourselves for what we really are. One of the reasons the rings sound such depths, one of the reasons it disconcerts as much as it enthralls us, is that Wagner was grappling with the kinds of questions that we don't even notice as long as we take the things that we see, feel, and think at face value, ourselves included. In Wagner's day, at least, this was the task of philosophy, to look beneath the surface. I don't think Wagner was a philosopher of the first rank, but he was no doofus either, and it was more than his personal magnetism that drew Nietzsche to him. I have to tell you, though, that not everyone agrees with me. Michael Tanner insisted that all attempts to turn Wagner into a philosopher in his own right, this one included, I assume, were vain and misleading. Other writers have called his thoughts, quote, a half-baked mishmash of one particular kind of socialism and conservatism, Hellenism and Teutonism, anti-Semitism and vegetarianism, Proudhon, Hegel, Feuerbach, Gobineau, and Schopenhauer. But it's not as bad as all that. In fact, it's interesting in its own right, and it's often extraordinarily relevant to the problems we face today. It's just that Wagner's theoretical writings are pretty much his thinking aloud. He really could have used a good editor, though he would never have wanted one. And he made things worse because he never set out to write a real philosophical text anyway. To see his philosophy as a whole, you need to piece it together from bits of his books, essays, and his letters. It does hang together, though, and it starts from the same insight that we find in many of the thinkers of his time, and which Wagner develops in creative ways, that life is a seamlessly collaborative activity which we can experience only in the confrontational form of self and other. A single web of activity gives rise to everything: horses, rocks, Wagner's beloved dogs, bedbugs, planets, forests, oceans, and, most importantly, everything that we do and experience. We can never be separated from its activity, and we are active within it, making it and shaping it, as well as being made and shaped by it. But somehow we have trouble seeing this. Something in our own nature obscures the roots of our own being. We seem firmly planted right here, and everything else is, well, out there somewhere, outside the world in our heads. How did that happen? The philosopher Johann Gottlieb Fichte argued that self-consciousness had to begin with a split. To know something is to hold it at arm's length, to treat it as an object. But the world isn't made up of natural subjects and natural objects. The separation between subject and object is something that we make ourselves. It is a human creation. We break the flow of sensation into things that we see, smell, feel, and can know on the one hand, and an I or a self that does the seeing, smelling, feeling, thinking, and knowing on the other. This is something that we do, but our cats and dogs do not. It's what distinguishes self-consciousness from consciousness or sentience. To become self-conscious, we had to estrange ourselves from the world, and paradoxically, we had to estrange ourselves from ourselves, too. Because the self is not a thing, it's a fiction. It wasn't there before we started breaking experience into inner and outer realms, and in fact, it's not anything but that act of self-assertion. We pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. The fiction is a necessary one. We can't think without it. But we need to see that this is exactly why we can never see ourselves as we really are, and why we can never reach the truth of things. Everything that we can say or think exists in a world that we've already split into subjects and objects. This means that truth lies outside of knowledge, and the only way we can know ourselves and know right from wrong is through the feeling, the tenor of experience. Fichte and the other German idealists thought that the unknown reality was the life of the divine, an infinite creativity that blossoms forth as our lives and as the life of the world. Of course, these things cannot be separated. Wagner himself was never a believer, at least not in any conventional sense, but he too argued that what was truly real was, quote, an ever self-renewing and self-creating, ever self-fulfilling, self-satisfying principle characterized by endless cohesion. Everything we experience is just a moment without that single, ungraspably complex activity. This is a genuinely philosophical starting point. Like Fichte, Wagner evokes a continuous process of creation, transformation, and destruction, the endless fertility that we associate with the natural world, but which lives within and shapes our own lives and thoughts as well. In Wagner's words, nature creates and shapes unintentionally and involuntarily as the need arises. out of necessity, therefore. And it is the same necessity which is the creative, shaping force behind human life. As we've already seen, though, things are not so simple for self-conscious beings like ourselves. Wagner saw this too, and he said that humanity came into being when we pulled ourselves away from the underlying activity of all things. The moment we humans became aware of our difference from nature, he wrote, when we set ourselves apart from nature and thought began to develop within us, that was the moment we went astray, error as the first expression of consciousness. From that moment on, we have tried to bridge the gap that we made through our personal lives, our art, our politics, and through our science, philosophy, and religion. In Wagner's words, the history of the birth of knowledge out of error is the history of the human species from primitive myth to the present day. But real knowledge is a very different kind of knowing from the one that we get from facts and theories. Searching for it is all too likely to lead us into deeper errors than the ones we are trying to undo, bedazzling us with what Wagner called fanciful images based not on nature, but on arbitrary willfulness. We want to know so we can navigate the chaos of everyday life with a firm foothold, but all thought is marked by the separation on which self-consciousness depends. What is real to and prior and beyond that split is what is real, so it cannot be an object of knowledge. By thinking about it or imagining it, we just push ourselves farther and farther away from what we think we are understanding. We mistake images for reality. How do we get out of that trap? Fichte had argued that only selfless, egoless moral action could align us with the life of the divine. Wagner had a somewhat similar insight. We do not need right views or better theories. Quote, we must entirely renounce the pursuit of the universal. What we need is the most radical kind of trust. We could embrace reality only by surrendering the ego of self-consciousness and the detached thinking that self-consciousness makes possible. Wagner asked his revolutionary comrade August Roeckel, to be real, to live, what is it but to be born, to grow, to bloom, to wither, and to die? And he went on, to be at one with truth is to give oneself up as a sentient human being wholly and entirely to reality, to encounter birth, growth, bloom, blight, and decay frankly, with joy and with sorrow, and to live to the full this life made up of happiness and suffering, so to live and so to die. It is tempting to see this as an anticipation of Nietzsche's amor fati, that deep sense that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity, not merely bear what is necessary, still less conceal it, but love it. For it was love, and sexual love in particular, that Wagner saw as the path towards selfless oneness with the real. He told Roeckel that we can only fully grasp a phenomenon if we can at one and the same time completely absorb it and be absorbed by it. And to achieve that absorption, he added, we must look to love and to love only. Egoism ceases at the moment when the I passes into the thou. We believe that we are separate beings who must armor ourselves against an indifferent or hostile world, and our finitude has power to strike terror into our souls, but it can do so only if we have lost our hold on reality. If, on the contrary, we are possessed by a sense of the reality of love, that terror vanishes, for love annihilates the notion of limitation. Wagner saw this most vividly in erotic union, which is both immersion in reality and a passage into shared agency. Now, he wrote, a human being is both man and woman, and it is only when these two are united that the real human being exists. And thus it is only by love that man and woman attain the full measure of humanity. But when nowadays we talk of a human being, such heartless blockheads are we that quite involuntarily we think only of men. And this is a model for all truly human connections. Only by merging with the other, with a community, therefore, can you be fully what you are, what you can be, and what you reasonably want to be, he said. Only in communism is egoism fully satisfied. Wagner wrote endlessly about love. But it's important to recognize that he didn't give it such importance because it made people nice or kind. It was not worthy because it inspired us to do good deeds or treat others as they deserve to be treated. It is not very much like what the Rhine Maidens or Alberich or even Wotan think about when they talk about love. Love is important because it is through love that we attain to the most perfect manifestation of reality. Love is central to human life because of its transformative and even destructive power. It returns us to reality, and as long as we live in love, we are freed from the misleading separation on which we had premised our conscious lives. It aligns us with the all-encompassing activity of what is real, an ever-flowing river in which we gladly immerse ourselves. It is a liberating force, freeing us from our own private needs and impulses so we can live as willing participants in the life we share with all others. This underlies Wagner's very interesting theories about art and about drama in particular, but it also underlies his political thinking, and here it's both directly relevant and disturbingly contemporary. We should remember that he had been an active propagandist and more in the continent-wide revolutions of 1848 and 1849, and the defeat of the uprising in Dresden, where he was head of the opera house, had forced him into exile. If he had not gotten out of Saxony, he would certainly have been sentenced to death, as were his friends Röckel and Bakunin. Both sentences were eventually commuted. In his theoretical works, he puzzled over that disaster. Why had the revolution failed? As he told Röckel years later, he had once thought that to make a better world, it was only necessary for people to want it. I ingeniously set aside the problem why they did not want it. Wagner's answer came right out of his philosophy. He came to think that the split between self-conscious humanity and the life of the real had baleful historical and political consequences. On the one hand, it led to a deeply inhuman, even anti-human society. The desire to know and to build a lasting order had cut off all movement. Our ideas were meant to keep the peace and promote prosperity, but ideas are static and inflexible, and to live by them, we had to deny the surging movement of life itself. We boxed ourselves into a fixed and suffocating antagonism between the individual and the state. On the other hand, it bred passivity and resignation. Social life, where each of us should open to all others, had become an unrelenting struggle instead. And without the living give and take of a truly human world, we sought refuge in a regressive narcissism. Quote, "Only in joy at life can egoism willingly put itself off. If life itself is a joyless thing to me, in its increase and multiplication, the maintenance of this joyless state, I naturally can find no satisfaction, but wish myself back into the state of innocence, namely of inactive, unproductive egoism." Real individuality is always social, something which we win alone within society. People make and remake each other through each other. The passive, beleaguered egoism that Wagner saw was nothing like that. Each person lived in isolation from all others, and they cannot truly act in common. For when they dream alone. As a result, not even utopian politics could lead us out of this trap. It too is always individual, always marked by the very condition it tries to escape. Nothing, wrote Wagner, has been more detrimental to human happiness than this insane zeal to build the future with the laws of the present. This revolting preoccupation with the future, in truth a function of gloomy absolute egoism, is at root nothing but an attempt to conserve what we have today, to reassure us for our lifetime. We long for the humanity of the future, he wrote to Röckel, but we cannot create it. It has to create itself by means of our annihilation. And here is one of the ways in which Wagner as philosopher connects with Wagner as dramatist, because The Ring, among many other things, dramatizes both sets of consequences. The first of these is what plagues Wotan, who starts as a lawgiver and finds himself a tyrant. The second act monologue in Die Walküre lays this out with pitiless clarity. It parallels a philosophical history of the state that Wagner had developed in his book Opera and Drama, based on his reading of Sophocles. in which a primitive, family-centered community gives way to a fixed order grounded in habit and inertia, and where the maintenance of property relations and peace and quiet was deemed the highest political wisdom. This is, in fact, very hard to distinguish from the contract state over which Wotan presides, symbolized, of course, by the individual agreements that are cut into his spear. To secure that order, Wagner wrote, the state had to suppress the holiest and most instinctive social feelings, expressions of nature's ceaseless creativity. The force of that movement was hidden behind the blank faces of interchangeable but nominally separate individuals. But it always threatened to break out in tones of yearning and finally of revolt. Social stability was therefore a facade, and shoring up that facade was an endless and hopeless struggle. Since the establishment of the political state, said Wagner, no single step has been taken in history, but that it be directed at never so deliberate aim at the state's consolidation has led towards its downfall. This is what Wotan is beginning to discover. What had once been a whirl of inspired improvisation has become a nightmare. Every step he takes now only makes his problems worse. He drives the earth into bloody chaos. He fails to create a free hero, and the plan he created not only makes more human misery, it leads him into a position for which, for perfectly reasonable reasons of state, he has to ensure the death of his own son. He's learning something that the economist Adam Tooze wrote about only last month. The exception, the emergency, the crisis, the ad hoc are not bugs. They're features of our reality. They are both systemically produced. The international relations system produces and reproduces discretionary violence. The capitalist economy expands and grows through crisis. The parallels may not be quite exact, but the opposition between the maintenance of quiet and order and the surging life of natural necessity is both a contemporary dilemma and a theme that runs through the ring cycle. This may sound close to or identical with the idea that the ring is about power versus love, but it is in fact something different. Wotan may be power mad, but he doesn't have to be power mad to act as he does, and we would actually not care about him so much if he were. He simply needs to be committed to maintaining a specific world order so firmly that everything and everyone must be sacrificed to its survival. This is more than a crime. It is a mistake. The historical argument of opera and drama is that, in the long run, a battle like Wotan's can never be won. The ring cycle makes much the same argument, but it is a drama, not a history, and it centers on the ring for a number of reasons. The ring is, after all, the antithesis of any passable human order, because the absolute power of the ring seals off any connection with the life of the real, which is why it has to be purchased with the renunciation of love. It is also, for the same reason, an instrument of death, because to set yourself against the life of reality is to condemn yourself to death. It's often said that Wagner's magic elements are very often simply visual representations of things that are there anyway. And in some respects, Albert doesn't need to curse the ring. It's always, from the beginning, a weapon of death. But it also puts Wotan's order under intense pressure. It tests that order to the breaking point. The pressure does indeed ultimately break it, but it was, in fact, doomed from the beginning. Wagner expresses that point most vividly in the prologue to Götterdämmerung, when the Norns reveal the price that the world pays for Wotan's rule. They are, in fact, very kind to Wotan. They think very highly of his laws and his observance of principles of order. But they also tell us that the spear on which he had inscribed his contracts comes from the world ash tree, and when he cut off the branch to make that spear, the tree began to die. Along with it died the spring of wisdom that the Norns drink from. The ecological references here are obvious and undeniable, but I think Wagner had another point to make with it too. Both are valid, both are connected. Wotan's sphere is a symbol of a society of individuals held together by external contracts and agreements. And we should be able to see now that all such societies are founded on a wound that never heals, the rupture between self and world. Erda warns Wotan, in at least some versions of The Ring, that his world had to end and that the best he could do would be to keep that end from being shameful. He does indeed avoid that fate, but not because he comes up with some superior plan or a more responsive political structure. He does it by turning away, in his complex and conflicted responses to a spontaneous act by the real protagonist and hero of the story, Brünnhilde, his daughter and Erda's. Brünnhilde's defiance of her father is fundamentally political. We usually think of Die Walküre as a love story, thanks to the glories of its first act. But when we look at all three acts together, it is at least as much about the price of power. Wotan's children, the Volsung Siegmund and Sieglinde, are paying that price. They are both victims of Wotan's great idea, and their parts in his plotting have all but destroyed them. Watch Act 2 and Sieglinde's scenes, watch Act 1 and Sieglinde's scenes in Act 2 tomorrow night, and I think you will see and hear an almost unbearable suffering. Were it not for its compassion and specificity, Wagner's portrayal of Sieglinde could have come from a textbook on emotional or psychological abuse. Siegmund is just as scarred. Wotan wanted to create a hero who rebels against his own laws, so he raised his son to be brave and friendless. Siegmund, like any loving child, sees nothing wrong with this. He is fiercely proud of his father and their life together as outlaws. Wotan, though, can always drop his disguise, go back to Valhalla, and have the Valkyries hand him horns of mead. Siegmund is left to fight with or flee from everyone he encounters. His adored father has condemned him to his life of grievous suffering. He is also a mere pawn in Wotan's game, and as Fricka shows her husband, he must die so that the world, Wotan's world, could survive. This is a utilitarian, reason of state argument, and one key to the action of the drama is that Brünnhilde is deaf to it. Once she encounters the Volsungs, it no longer made any sense to her. The price of propping up Wotan's order was no longer distant, no longer an abstraction, and she could not ask anyone to pay it. She no longer cared about Wotan's great idea or the world he had built, and, more importantly, she no longer cared about herself. She acted out of pure necessity. Like Sophocles' Antigone, who was surely Wagner's model for her character, Brünnhilde found herself in a state of pure, egoless acceptance, willing to set aside her own individual wants and needs to become a pure presentation of reality. That is where Antigone had taken her stand. She had emptied herself of herself, risen above her fear of death, and could thus speak for everything that the state had rejected and repressed. This, by the way, of course, is Wagner's interpretation, not everyone's interpretation. Brünnhilde, too, found herself radically free. She did not act out of individual or familial interests. Nowhere in The Ring is there any indication that Brünnhilde is aware that Siegmund and Sieglinde are her siblings, half-siblings. She acts out of the deepest morality. In Kantian terms, she will not treat the Volsungs as means to Wotan's ends. This refusal alone was enough to shatter her father's fixed and inhuman order and throw its doors open to life itself. I think Wagner assumed that Brünnhilde's selflessness revealed what necessity commanded, but whether or not she could see what had to happen, she does change the world. Wotan had told himself that his own world order, as flawed and cruel as it had become, was still preferable to anything that might replace it. Whatever he had said in his second act monologue, he was not really willing to let the world fall into Albrecht's hands. Now, once Brünnhilde had made sure that Sieglinde lived and would give birth to Siegfried, he could see that this was not the only alternative. Something better could follow the end of what he had built. He let slip the crushing responsibility of rulership, and with that act he finds that he can look at his child with pride, love, and even gratitude. She herself is the free person he could not create. By saving Sieglinde and her child, she had released him from the world's weight, and because of that, he can step aside so the future can make itself. Brünnhilde, though, cannot make that future either. Her tragedy arises, at least in part, because she too is a person of Wotan's world, and she can only rarely escape the nostalgia and passivity, the unproductive egoism that is the personal side to the kind of world that he built. She pushes forwards towards the future, towards a different way of life, but she was always pulled back by her past. Through Wotan's story, Wagner charts out how hard it is to let go of our picture of how the world should be. Brunhilde's story shows us how hard it is to let go of our picture of how our own lives should be. In the last scene of Siegfried, when she is awakened, Brunhilde tells Siegfried that she has always loved him, but what she had loved was only an image, a static idea which posed no threat to her own picture of herself. As soon as her first delight fades, she begins to retreat from the real flesh and blood boy, to take shelter in the relics of her past, clinging to a narcissistic memory of a literally armored security. Begging him to leave her rather than destroy her with his love, Brunhilde asks Siegfried if he has ever seen his image in the water. If you stir up waves in the stream, she reminds him, the image vanishes in the billows. Siegfried is unconvinced. He tells her that he sees only the billows, and Siegfried welcomes it even though his own image disappears. He longs to merge with that stream and lose himself. He is unattached to any sense of self. This is the turning point. Brunhilde is wedded to her image of Brunhilde just as much as she was wedded to her image of Siegfried. She cannot see what she might be if she is not a Valkyrie. Siegfried is asking her to leap into the unknown, and this is terrifying because it does away with the ego she has been trying to hold on to and the world she has come to count on. But she really does love the foolish boy, and as they embrace, she sees at once what love grants them in recompense. It is the absolute trust which opens her to radiant love and laughing death. She and Siegfried both give themselves, quote, wholly and entirely to reality, to encounter birth, growth, bloom, blight, and decay, frankly, with joy and with sorrow, and to live to the full this life made up of happiness and suffering. Their final duet is a confession of love, of course, but genuine love for Wagner is always amor fati, the love of one's destiny. So at the same time, they welcome all that may come, no matter the cost. It does not last. Siegfried is natural necessity come to life, but he is not conscious of this fact. I mean, really, he's not very conscious of very much at all. And that is why he falls apart in the all-too-human world of Decameron. But Brunhilde falls apart too. As Wagner had told Rico, Siegfried alone is not the complete human being. He is merely the half. Brunhilde, too, is not the complete human being once they are separated. But Waltraute, distraught, steals away from Valhalla to beg her to give back the ring to the Rhine maidens. Brunhilde says no. The ring is Siegfried's love token, she says, worth more to her than Valhalla's bliss and eternal glory. Its light is the holy light of Siegfried's love. Waltraute, driven away, laments Brunhilde's loveless obstinacy. And she is right, because the ring is just a hunk of metal. What has passed and could pass between Siegfried and Brunhilde is unaffected by any symbol, and the two will mean as much to each other whether or not Brunhilde holds on to the ring. In her isolation, though, Brunhilde had sought comfort in an object in which she had projected an image of past happiness, something finite and static, and finitude and stasis are the death of love and really death itself. The duet at the end of Siegfried had shown how hard it was for her to pull away from images and live in the ever-changing reality disclosed by love. And when Siegfried leaves, she falls back into old habits, doting on the memories and dreams she calls up when looking at the ring as she had once been drawn to the memories evoked by her helmet and breastplate. She will not give it up even to heal the world. She does give it up in the end, but only after Siegfried's betrayal had brought her to wisdom, and she could do that only in death. Behind these two interwoven stories and behind Wagner's political philosophy is a vision of two possible worlds, or more accurately, the present-day world and the one which he hoped would replace it. Wotan's world is the first of these. It is built around ideas, It's made up of self-seeking, though actually self-denying, individuals, their lives regulated and coordinated by external structures. Humanity kept only on the straight and narrow by property or laws, as Wagner said. This world is always at risk of sliding into chaos if there is no ordering power. Brunhilde and Siegfried were reaching towards something else, a world where people constantly form and reform each other, their lives grounded in openness, mutuality, and flexibility, reflecting the inexhaustible variety of the relations of living individualities to one another. Only in that second world is genuine love possible. In the first, it is no more than a respite from the stress and sterility of the everyday, a haven in a heartless world. Both of the Ring's tragic heroes fail. Both father and daughter identify themselves with ideas of their own making, unaware that this removes themselves further than ever from the reality of the world. Wotan makes a fetish of the world order that he had shaped. Brunhilde fails because her struggles show how hard it can be to rise above her attachment to the persuasive fictions of selfhood. And even in her final moments of wisdom and clear sight, she cannot usher in a transformed world. She can only put an end to the old one. The new world, if there is to be a new world, is for us to create. Throughout The Ring, Wagner explores the price we pay for trying to force reality into the mold of our concepts. And part of its fascination is how he sees this at work in the personal, political, and ethical realms. He grasps how intertwined these are and never reduces one aspect to the other. This may be one reason that The Ring seems to show us a living world. But it shows us, too, that the problems of such a world cannot be resolved by adopting better values or a new and improved set of basic ideas. It was cursed in the cradle. Wotan's world is in crisis because it has walled itself off from life and from reality itself, and neither Wotan nor Brunhilde can heal it because they, like the rest of us, cannot bear very much reality. Wagner clearly saw this at work in his own society. He told Rickel that Wotan was the humanity of the present day, and The Ring is, among many other things, a deep and broad critique of the world in which Wagner lived. But surprisingly little has changed since then. The Ring shows us our world, too, and the complexity and occasional grandiosity of Wagner's vision makes us feel that we have been shown the fate of every imaginable scheme to manage it and every dream of transforming it from within. They are one and all undermined by the primal delusions of self-consciousness. But if we cannot think beyond that separation, the broader and deeper life of reality goes unseen and unfelt. We then see ourselves as strangers in a strange land. Morality becomes privatized. We can strive to lead decent lives, but even in the most democratic of communities, we must live them within what is, at best, an amoral society, which has been emptied out of content to make room for individuals' private choices. The level playing field we hear so much about. This sounds liberating until we realize that our life can never be fundamentally different from the way it is now. As Wagner insisted, why no new world could be made with the laws of the present. We have, in fact, made ourselves profoundly helpless, just like Wotan and Brunhilde. And in spite of our wholehearted efforts, our planet is becoming ever more perilous to us and our non-human brethren, ever more impoverished in terms of biological diversity, and ever more devoid of spontaneous human interactions or even common civility. There must be other ways to live, and I think the hope of another truly human world is what carries The Ring to its unexpectedly glorious close. For all of Wagner's emotional nastiness and intellectual indiscipline, he understood the illusions at the root of his and our world, and how they feed the injustices and miseries of our political, economic, social, and even personal lives. He understood the yearning to build an unpoisoned community, which did not drive humanity apart from nature and humanity apart from itself. And he insisted that this yearning was no mere dream. It was the expression of what we truly are, and it is more rooted in the reality of life than the common sense of capitalism or even the evidence of introspection. He felt this viscerally, and he was able to body it forth in poetry, dramatic action, visual imagery, and above all, of course, in music, all put to the service of an essentially philosophical insight. The Ring is a great work of art, but it is philosophy too. And its kind of philosophy still has its uses, most of all because it can shake us awake and lead us to think about things that are not real. Oh, sorry, I am very sorry. It can shake us awake and lead us to think about things that are real even though we cannot see them, things that may well be more real than those which we can see. Thank you very much. I would be happy to try to answer any questions. I attempted, John Cage long ago, for one of his lectures, wrote 5 answers. And he gave those 5 answers to the first 5 questions, whatever those questions were. I will try to be a bit more responsive. I will try to listen and be receptive. The woman there first.
So my question is, I have 2 questions, but one is, did you say that Brunhilde defies Wotan because she no longer cares about his goals?
No longer cares about what?
No longer cares about his goals.
She asked, did I say that Brunhilde defies Wotan because she no longer cares about his goals? And I think the answer is no. That would kind of imply that she has different goals or she judges his goals. She simply refuses to do an utterly immoral act. And that's it. And she doesn't really care what follows. She just does what she has to do.
And, she clearly says later she did what she feels is his will. That's the only thing she acts through.
There's an interesting kind of dialectic there because she does really try to argue with him. And she keeps picking away at this because, of course, Wotan, at one level, Wotan is as I say in the book, he expects us to feel sorry for the sorrow he inflicts on himself for being miserable to other people. And so he's very aware. He doesn't need to be told how much he loves Siegmund. He doesn't want to be told how much he loves Siegmund because by the logic of his situation and the necessity of maintaining the only thing that stands between humanity and Alberich, Siegmund has to die. Right. And so appealing to his feelings doesn't help.
Okay, I think I just wasn't clear what point you were making.
Well, I may not be clear about what point I was making either, so I hope this helps clarify for both of us.
I just have one other quick question about there's nowhere in the Ring that indicates that Brunhilde knows that she's a sibling of Siegmund and Sieglinde. But
did I get that wrong?
I don't know, but when he asks if he'll see his father in Valhalla, she says yes, so then I can assume she knows who his father is. That's true, but
it never comes up as justification for what she does. She doesn't save Siegmund because she's half brother.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. Because when I read the book, I would have these questions. So
yeah, I left out the thing about nowhere in there, so I'm safe there. Next person.
At the end of the triangle of Wotan, and I'm paraphrasing from the libretto, suggests that his recognition of fear is his justification for wanting to keep the ring. That is and letting go of fear is the thing that allows him to take the ring off. And is that an accurate portrayal of what Wotan's motivations are?
I don't know if it's an accurate portrayal of what Wotan's motivations are, but it does fit nicely with a theme that I didn't bring out in here, which is that for Wagner, fear and love are always opposed. Which is to say, fear is also opposed to the experience of reality. That as long as we are threatened by what may happen, we cannot accept it, we cannot live with it, we cannot fully live. And the ring is a symbol of fear in that sense because it is meant to keep the world away. It is meant to dominate the world and turn it into something that we would rather have. And the fact is that Alberich, for whom Wagner does have some sympathy, has gotten to the point where he just wants to trample on everybody. Wotan wants it for better reasons, he thinks. But the moment he has it, I think this is one of the things he realizes in the scene with Erda, although Wagner has cut that scene down to its bare bones, really hard to see exactly what she wants to say. But Wotan truly knows that the order of law disappears the moment you have anticipatory obedience. And even if he doesn't use the ring, assuming, and this is another question, assuming the ring really does give you universal power whenever you want to use it, because no one ever does that. But assuming that, and Wotan thinks that it will, and if the rest of the world thinks that it will, they're just going to obey without thinking. And there goes, that's the shameful end, I think, that Erda is talking about, is the betrayal of the at least overtly rational world order, a world order that made sense within its own restricted limits, not paying attention to its fundamental rottenness. Because there are better and worse ways of dealing with a fundamentally rotten world. Not that Wagner cared about that. He just wanted to burn it all down. Anybody else? No? Oh, sorry.
It strikes me that there is one very crucial element of the ring cycle that we haven't touched on yet, and that is at the end, at the destruction of the world, what remains? Alberich. So Alberich begins the cycle and ends the cycle. So in a sense, the story is also about what I might call the Alberich principle. Even Wotan, as you just mentioned, recognizes himself as an Alberich. He calls himself, doesn't he, white Alberich?
Absolutely.
Alberich is black Alberich. So this is another reason why I think Wagner's metaphysics, so to speak, is not merely, to reduce it perhaps too much, to what goes on internally in the story with the attempts and the failures of various individuals. It's a metaphysical principle. I know that Wagner toyed with two kinds of endings, the Feuerbach ending, the optimism, and the Schopenhauer ending. And it strikes me that the Schopenhauer ending, pessimism, is really the final, though unarticulated idea that it's really the world belongs to Alfred.
I'll give a John Cage kind of answer to that first, which is, I don't hear that in the music. That's the music that first appears when Sieglinde realizes that she is pregnant with the world's greatest hero. And she knows that all of her suffering, and it is terrible, all of her suffering will be justified. It's not been for nothing. And I cannot imagine that Wagner didn't think the same thing about that theme at the end of Götterdämmerung. It is also, it's so common, I'm sorry, it's very common to say the world ends at the end of Götterdämmerung, but Wagner explicitly makes sure that we know that's not what happens. The stage directions for the end of Götterdämmerung are very clear, and they're very limited. The Hall of the Gewichnungs is consumed by fire from this oversized funeral pyre, and the flames die down. The Rhine floods because the Rhine maidens need to get back the ring, and they don't have feet. So The Rhine has to come up so they can swim to it, and then they go back, and it's back in its banks, and everything's fine. And the Wotan's ravens go tell Loge to set Valhalla on fire, and we see it burning in the distance, and the people on stage see it burning in the distance. What has disappeared is every form of transcendence. That's one of the themes that gets developed in the revisions of Götterdämmerung. That's seen when Hagen is telling the vassals to kill an animal for Fricke and kill this for Wotan and so on. And he knows very well that nobody's going to listen and nobody's going to do a thing. They're just sitting stumm in Valhalla waiting for the end. But the local nobility disappears, the gods disappear, we're just left on our own. And Alberich is there too, yeah, because in fact, there is, I don't think Wagner was big on metaphysical principles, but to have Alberich still there does indicate we're always still going to be pulled away from reality.
Isn't it a cycle? We start with the end with the beginning.
Well, it's an interesting thing, and I'll have to refer you to the book because Wagner, the 1848 Ring, Wotan is barely a character. And it's an Alberich story. And yeah, it does, you can read it that way. But as Wagner reworks it in the early 1850s, he begins to develop a Wotan story. And it comes to him, Wagner Thomas Mann said that Wagner is always marked by a kind of dilettantish quality that by virtue of heroic effort he raised to the level of genius. And John Dethridge said, there's hardly anything more horrible than to look at the initial sketches for the end of Götterdämmerung, because it looks like something that a graduate student could have turned in. It was the rewriting, it was the development. Wagner was almost done with the rewriting. He was working on, I think, Valkyrie, because he sort of wrote backwards, when all of a sudden, Wotan acquires a spear, a symbolic spear. And he has to go through and rewrite parts of the third act of Siegfried, because now the spear means something. At the same time, he's developing all these incredible parallels. It's not just Licht, Alberich, and so on, but Wotan has cat's paw children who are half siblings to one of his own children. And Alberich has Hagen, who's half-brother to the Gibichungs. There are deliberate parallels, and we see them as two different ways of responding to a fundamental crisis. And yes, Wotan's world disappears, but yes, Alberich is still there. The crisis never goes away. We are always going to be pulled back to the belief that we're all alone, we dream alone, we die alone.
Is that pessimism?
I don't think it's pessimism. And in fact, as I said, I don't hear pessimism. And the thing about Schopenhauer is that Wagner did come up with that ending, which is, it would have been the worst thing he did because it's completely inconsistent with everything else in the immolation scene. If Brynhilde is going to disappear, if she's going to enter nirvana by leaving the cycle of life and death, then it makes no sense for her to be reunited with Siegfried. Whereas in the Ring as it stands, there is an afterlife. She's going to be with Siegfried and Hela, like Siegmund and Sieglinde. And Hela is not hell, it's just verbal coincidence. But Wagner had never heard of Schopenhauer at the time he wrote the text of the Ring.
He read Schopenhauer about that 12-year interval between the third act of Siegfried and Götterdämmerung.
No, he read Schopenhauer long after that, but the text of the Ring is, except in minor details, complete in the form he published in 1853. And it wasn't until 1854 that somebody introduced him to Schopenhauer. So,
And he stopped until 1869.
no, he was writing, and he composed until, I think, 1857 or so. And then decided to do something small and easy to produce, so he wrote Tristan. Yes, and Meistersinger. Except Meistersinger sort of is simultaneous with the completion of the Ring, and it's not as good. It's not as funny a line. I hope that gives you some.
Wondering if there's any connection between Edmund Husserl and Radius and Wagner. At the beginning, you described this conception of love in almost like phenomenological terms, and Husserl leading to Heidegger phenomenology. I was just wondering if you knew they overlap in any ways.
Yeah, it's been about 20 years since I read any Husserl, but unlike Heidegger in some ways, well, no, actually not unlike Heidegger, because Heidegger is, both Husserl and Heidegger maintain in their own kind of idiosyncratic ways the idea of some unknowable life world, which is Husserl's phrase, that is the necessary background to the contents of we understand through the phenomenological reduction, where we're just going through the contents of our experience. Heidegger especially, in the sense that the entirety of Western philosophy has been a way of keeping ourselves from the actual self-unveiling of reality, which always exists outside of the structures of philosophy. Those people are much later than Wagner, but I don't think, nobody's taken Wagner seriously as a philosopher. Nobody's tried to piece together the synthesis that I've tried to present parts of here. But it wasn't really necessary because Husserl wrote several admiring essays, a series of lectures on Fichte. And Heidegger was obsessed with Hölderlin, the great poet, who was also a significant thinker philosophically. They were all part of this incredible ferment of philosophy and politics and poetry at the beginning of the 19th century, late 18th century. So it was there, and Wagner drank from that well, and so many years later did Husserl and Heidegger.
I was going to, thank you for your talk. I'm just intrigued to know if you were able to show us the two images you mentioned. What were they?
Well, one is the sort of standard grizzled, full-on Wagner that you see in the cover of the New Grove Wagner and things like that. And the other is from the cover of the book. Our son-in-law, who's an artist, did it, but it's based on an 1850 drawing by Henri Lehmann, who's best known for the sort of standing portrait of Liszt. He's sort of looking this way. And Wagner is sitting, sort of looking off. He's got long, loose hair. He's troubled and introspective. He hasn't got things figured out. And actually Nicholas said to me, he said, I could never care about the Wagner and all the images I saw, but the Wagner here I can like. So, anybody else?
Yeah, I don't know if this is thank you, by the way. I thought this was awesome. I have heard that Wagner was dissatisfied with Tannhäuser, how he wrapped that up, and I admit that compared to the end of
I can't answer your question because I haven't thought about Tannhäuser that much. I'm not terribly happy with it myself. And it does predate Wagner's really strong engagement with philosophy. I think one of the things that makes The Ring so great is the amount of time Wagner spent thinking and rethinking it. And under the pressure of producing things for immediate staging, he didn't have that luxury. The defeat of the revolution gave him that luxury, although it sure didn't feel like that at the time. From then on, I mean, he had developed a really complex and fertile way of thinking about human problems and relationship and social problems that he could draw on more or less at will. But before then, they tended to be sort of tropes, the self-sacrificing woman and things that were, I think, more immediate emotional responses to his own personal situation. The great thing about Wagner is he knew how things were supposed to end, but he didn't know why. And you look at the end of The Ring, and it's Meyerbeer. It's like the disaster machine at the end of The Prophet, or so on. And the things that Wagner said were effects without causes. So here he has an effect. Damn it, he doesn't spend years trying to figure out what the causes are.
I know for sure there was one more question at the back here, and I think we would entertain one more burning question after that. And then my request is that you go and mob Michael in the lobby with all kinds of further questions. So I know, yes.
Maybe it's just me trying to balance an idea to a professional as a layman, but the ideas, I guess seeing these kind of ideas of love and power within the cycle itself is very confusing at times, because you have Albert West and Fasthold and Wagner who are maybe trying to use power in itself to attain love, right? But then you have characters like Sigmund and Siegfried who do enforce their power on the world through slaying Wagner or dueling, I forget the secret disciples name. But I'm not sure that they use that power inherently to attain love, maybe to have that power itself displayed for the world, but they don't display it or use it to get love. I'm not sure what it is necessarily that they use to attain love. Maybe love itself, I'm not sure. I would love your opinion on that.
Well, you can't get power. You can't get love from power. Power is a way of imposing an image on the world. And love is the act of letting go of images. And one of the things about Siegfried is, he kills Fafner. But he kills Fafner basically because he's told, this is what you go do. And he's really not all that upset with Fafner. You think in a different world, he'd sit down and have a beer with him. Because Siegfried, one of the things about Siegfried is he's difficult as a character because he doesn't have an actual drive to do anything. It's the woodbird who tells him, go do this, pick these up, go up the hill, there's a wonderful woman, and so on. And he does all that, and then, when he falls in among the Gibeons, he does what they want him to do. Go rape this woman. He ends up doing what his father was killed for preventing. Because Siegmund is fleeing the Hunding clan because he was trying to protect a woman who was being forced into a marriage. And Siegfried is the flow of events. He never separates himself from that. But without Brünnhilde, he's only the half person. You know, there's no sense of, you know, Brünnhilde can at times open herself to the wider range of reality, so that she sees what real necessity is rather than immediate need. You know, and the talk of love in Rheingold is interesting, because it certainly, as I said, it doesn't seem like the love Wagner talks about in his sort of more theoretical writing, and it doesn't seem like the love that happens between Brünnhilde and Siegfried, for instance, or at the end between Wotan and Brünnhilde. But they're fraudulent images of love. Everybody in Rheingold, which is to a certain extent a political satire, everybody in Rheingold is besotted with an image of what they think they want, except perhaps for Loge, who has that great line, you know, at the end, like, go tan yourself by the sun of Wotan's castle. Because he knows that Wotan has paid for this castle by their gold. But everybody thinks they can get it one way or another. You know, and poor Fasold, who really is a sweet kind of guy, but he can't figure out, you know, he can't figure out how to actually build a relationship with anyone. He just loves Freya. And that's all that means anything to him. But that too is an image, you know, the sort of happy homestead in Riesenheim. Does that help at all?
Yeah, it does a lot.
Okay. Was there one more here?
Perhaps Wally?
This is sort of a trivial question, you probably can't answer, but we know how Wagner spent years and years writing the libretto and then reworking it. I've always wondered what, when he was doing this, did he think about the musical themes that he was going to use?
He did.
Do you know anything about that?
He did actually start composing. Sorry, microphone. He did actually start composing Siegfried's Death, the 1848. But he was, I think, more concerned with working out how word and music could work together. And that's what opera and drama is largely about. I think it was only afterwards, once Rheingold suffers to some extent from the fact that a lot of it is governed by theory. You know, trying to make sure that the motifs line up with what people are saying, and that what people are saying is basically not the expressive content, and so on, because the expressive content is in the orchestra. And then when he comes to Valkyria, where he's really quite taken with all of his characters, all of a sudden, like he starts forgetting that, and the music just glows. But he certainly could not have written Valkyria if he hadn't worked through things in Rheingold. But I don't believe he was doing much sketching. His practice was always to write the text first. So, thank you again very much. Thank you for putting up with my verbal slips, and it's been a great experience.
Oh, there you go. Michael, better late than never. Yeah, better late than never, look.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
You got it. 1868, 1850.